Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. I'll call the meeting to order. And Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets this evening?
Yes, we have regrets this evening from Councillor Robinson and Councillor Khan.
Thank you. Council, do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Thank you. Could we get a mover and seconder to resolve on the Committee of the Whole? Councillor Johnston, Councillor Elgar, all in favor? Opposed? We are resolved into Committee of the Whole. We have no consent items or public hearing items tonight, but we do have a list of discussion items. The first one is the recommendation report and on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for QEW Brawny Developments. And Council Gabe Charles has a presentation if you need it. Mr. Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would note off the top that the reference should be made to the zoning bylaw amendment, which was circulated just before this meeting. It's been updated slightly from the one that is attached in the agenda. And I'll make reference to that in my presentation. Just a quick overview of the application and where the site is located at QEW and Brawny Road. Approximately 2 hectares, known municipally as 1087, 1099, and 1105 Brawny Road. The lands to the west are part of the Brawny Creek Valley. The Halton Region headquarters are just north of the subject property. The interchange for the QEW Brawny Road has recently been reconstructed, and the required lands have been conveyed from the subject property. The proposed zoning amendment seeks a change in use from the Parkway Belt public use to a modified commercial zone. The uses being contemplated are intended to be consistent with the designations outlined in the Livable Oakville plan. The amendment will facilitate the future development of this site. There are different regulations which are proposed for the east and the west side of the site to ensure compliance with the 2 land use designations. The retail and service commercial uses would be permitted on the west side of the property, and office uses would be permitted on the east. The new official plan designates the westerly half of the property as business commercial, while the easterly half is office employment. This latter designation provides opportunities for prestige office uses, and the business commercial designation provides for service, commercial, convenience, retail uses that support the surrounding employment areas and the traveling public. The existing zoning of the subject property is Parkway Belt Public Use, the 05 zone. The zone category corresponds to the Parkway Belt West Plan and does not at this time allow for the type of development permitted by the Livable Oakville plan. So the proposed zoning better reflects and implements the commercial and the employment uses envisioned for the site as identified by the official plan. And a holding provision is included in the zoning bylaw amendment to ensure development on the east side does not proceed ahead of time, where Halton Region Police Service can move their telecommunications beam, which could interfere or could be interfered by new development on the site. So staff has reviewed the proposal in the context of the Livable Oakville Plan policy, recommend approval of the application and the zoning bylaw amendment. If there are any questions, be pleased to answer those.
Councillor Elgar.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned only 2 addresses. What about 1105 Brawny Road? Is something changed? Because you mentioned 1087 and 1099.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry if I missed that. That is included.
That is included, okay. As far as the antenna requirements of the Halton Regional Police, what do you know about that, and where are we on that area? Because the height is different from the building to the north.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the information that we have received from the police is that they intend to be moving their communication system. Early 2012 should be completed by mid-2012 in the summer months. So what this holding provision allows is the west side of the site to develop up to 2 stories, which wouldn't interfere with the beam. We've done a number of different exercises to ensure that we know where the beam location is going, because it's going southerly to the fire station at Rebecca Street. So at such time as the new beam has been moved, the police will let us know, and the applicant can come forward to apply to lift the holding provision on that east side.
So right now, nothing can go above 2 stories until that holding provision is removed.
The limit that is being proposed in this bylaw amendment for the west side is 2 stories. But on the east side, it would be up to possibly 9 stories, but that can't happen until the beam has been moved.
You take me back to the layout of looking at the in and the out. That's perfect. What's the distance from the stoplight at the North Service Road and Bronte Road to the access and egress on North Service Road to the east?
The rough scale on that is roughly about 55, 60 meters, somewhere in there. The subsequent site plan process we'll be using to ensure that we have a reasonable distance there, and that access would also be right in, right out only.
I thank you for that.
Anyone else? Any members of the public here with information for council on this? Ms. Townsend, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just here to speak on behalf of the applicant this evening. I'm here with all of the owners of the property. I'm also here with Michael Spaziani, who's the architect, and John Gent, who's the planner on the project. Just to confirm that we have been working since 2007 on this project. We did amend the project to conform to livable Oakville, even though the application predates livable Oakville. And we have had extensive discussions with the Ministry of Transportation, have had discussions with the police department since the last of the public meetings here. And we're confident that those issues have now been all addressed in the format of the zoning bylaw, which is in front of you. So I just wanted to indicate that we're very grateful for the work that staff has done with us and hope that you'll see favor with this evening and approve the application.
Well, thank you for that. Councillor Elgar or Councillor Lapworth, do one of you have a motion? Councillor Elgar? Councillor Elgar first, and then Councillor Bird.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We've got the revised zoning application.
Yes.
Lynn, what is different on this one? We arrived here at 7 o'clock tonight.
The difference was that the holding provision in the bylaw that you saw as a part of your package earlier had a provision for an ESA to be done to the satisfaction of the region. Well, in fact, that has been done, and we have the clearance letter from the region. So we just wanted the bylaw to delete the need for the H for the ESA because that had already been done. And so staff have confirmed, they have the letter from the region confirming that, and so they took that out. That's the only change.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bird.
Just refresh my memory, what would be the height of a story? And in this, you see in the back in the bylaw, you've got like specific dimensions, meters, and whatever it is, and then we talk about height of stories. And in that area, I would assume the regional headquarters, the council chamber, would be deemed 1 story. So when we talk 2 or 4, what are we really talking height of buildings? I just don't see a definition. I'm looking at page 104, 105, which I think is the bylaw which defines the appropriate bylaw.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we tend to do is provide a little bit of flexibility for the height of a story. Is dependent entirely on how the building is designed. When you run into office buildings, the floor height, the floor to ceiling or slab to slab can vary a little bit. So what the 39 meters allows for is 39 meters to the top of the roof deck, and then there's a permission here that anything that's above that on the, so mechanical penthouse, elevator towers, things like that can extend a little bit beyond that.
10 meters, but we're not building penthouses, are we? We're building office buildings.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, is referred to as a mechanical penthouse, which could have any chilling towers, air conditioning, the elevator tower, because that pops up usually above the roof decking, stair tower, those things.
I just think it's odd. We've got all the other dimensions very clearly spelled out, but then flexibility with height, which is one of the issues that Councillor Elgar brought up, is we talk in stories, but that doesn't bother me. It's the massing of the building rather than the number of levels or floors in the building, it's the massing. And you say 2, which is deemed a, what would we reasonably expect? 10 or 15 meter high building?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, on the
Like
west
the
side.
regional headquarters, is that 2 stories?
Yes, sir.
Save and except some parts of it are 1. The
Yes.
police building would be deemed 1. If we look at the atrium, it would be 2 if you want to call the mezzanine a floor. I don't want to get into semantics, but now I'm saying buildings that are 8, is that the police building times 4, what we're looking at? 'Cause that's the only building in the area that we got to compare it with. The sewage treatment plant, I think, is 1.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't tell you what the exact height is on the floor. Each floor height is for the Regions building. My guess, it's around the 5-meter mark, and we were looking at between 4.5 meters or so per floor, which gives you anywhere between up to 15, 18 feet, if my math is correct, somewhere in that neighborhood.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The chair looks for a motion. Councillor Elgar.
I'll move the modified staff recommendation.
Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. That brings us to our second discussion item, and we turn our attention to Tricia Collingwood, who has a presentation on the recommendation report for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for Neelis on Shepherd Road. Ward 2. Ward 2 may have a question.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here to present the zoning bylaw amendment application for Neelis, Shepherd Road, Inc., 5460 Shepherd Road. As an overview, the site is located at the corners, or just off the corner, to the east of the corner of Kerr and Shepherd Road. The site currently, there's 2 properties currently that make up the site. 54 Shepherd Road, which houses a 1-story, 6-unit commercial manufacturing building, as well as 60 Shepherd Road, which has a vacant 1-story house structure. The proposal includes 2 10-story towers connected by a 2-story podium. There are 201 units included in this proposal, 6 of which are live-work units. 8 townhouses are also included facing the eastern property line. Those townhouses are connected to the 2-story podium. For livable Oakville, this is one of the first applications to be considered under the new plan. It is consistent with the vision and the redevelopment policies for the Upper Kerr Village District. In the livable Oakville plan, the site is designated as urban center, allowing for 6 to 8 stories in height. The site is further eligible for bonusing and therefore may be permitted another 2 stories in height, subject to the applicant entering into a Section 37 agreement with the town. Retail commercial at grade is included on the ground floor through the provision of the live-work units. The site is currently zoned M3, heavy manufacturing, and the livable Oakville plan envisions the redevelopment of the last of the M3 lands that are located in this area of Kerr Village to be compatible with the mixed-use intensification of Kerr Village. A public information meeting was held on September 23rd of 2010. There was a total of 7 people that attended the meeting. A statutory public meeting was held on February 14th, 2011. Public comments received so far include the appropriate development for the site. The change of use identified in livable Oakville is suitable for the mixed-use redevelopment that is envisioned for Kerr Village. Comments have also received from the public information meeting include concerns over ensuring that there was parking provided on-site for the commercial uses. The commercial parking is to be provided in a surface lot on the site in accordance with the zoning bylaw. In addition, the retail space on the ground floor has been modified to live-work units. Stakeholders at the public meeting or public information meeting also welcome new commercial retail space to attract more people into the area. Also included in comments were concerns over transportation. The impact of the transportation network has been thoroughly analyzed through the transportation studies dating back as far as 2006 and 2009. This work was completed by the town in preparation for the policies of livable Oakville and the designation of Kerr Village as a growth node. It supported the intensification of Kerr Village, including the subject proposal. We find that the road network will operate at satisfactory levels of service for urban conditions. The town has identified the need for several roadwork projects that have been committed to in the town's capital plan. The capital plan is updated annually and includes the additional southbound left turn lanes at Spears and Kerr Street, as well as the CN Railway and grade separation. Those projects are currently committed for 2017. The applicant has submitted a transportation impact study that does not recommend any additional infrastructure improvements beyond what the town has already committed. Additional issues identified through the technical review of the application include Kerr Street and the CN grade separation EA. Through the technical review, we looked at the property impacts of the grade separation as far back as Shepherd and along Shepherd, which did impact the property to the point where we did undertake a preliminary design with McCormick Rankin to look at those property impacts and shift the building slightly south. Therefore, those impacts have been dealt with now. Also, we have a servicing capacity issue that has been identified by the region. That is something that the applicants are working with the region on. A record of site condition is required to be submitted by the applicant. And this is to do with residential development in proximity to industrial lands and the rail line, and just to identify any contamination that the site might contain. The land use compatibility with regards to the rail line, and impacts to 68 Shepherd Road, which is the property that is to the west of this application and adjacent to Empire. With that, we are looking at the impacts to that property. The property is currently for sale. Issues raised at the public meeting, we have been in discussion, we have talked with the owner of the property about the impacts to his site. The land is currently zoned M3, and it is intended to be rezoned and redeveloped in accordance with livable Oakville. The proposed bylaw permits mixed-use 3 zoning. This zoning would be in accordance with the new mixed-use zoning that would be included as part of the update of the new zoning bylaw. It permits C3 uses as well as a range of residential dwelling units. Live-work units permitted on the street frontage, which act as transitional space from residential to commercial, and regulates the number of units, the height, minimum commercial unit sizes, and parking. There's also a holding provision placed in the bylaw. The holding bylaw identifies the record of site condition submittal that the region is waiting on. It identifies the servicing capacity issue of the Shepherd Road pump station, as well as the Section 37 agreement with the town. The Section 37 provisions, the use of bonusing to provide public benefit in return for additional height is permitted on eligible lands through livable Oakville. Should the applicant wish to pursue the additional 2 stories in height, they would be required to enter in a Section 37 agreement with the town. The Livable Oakville Plan identifies the elements for bonusing within Kerr Village. Identified through transportation studies and residents' concerns regarding transportation is the top priority identified for bonusing in Kerr Village. Contributions to the ongoing service improvements to local transit within Kerr Village, including transit infrastructure such as stops, priority signalization, roadway improvements would be included in that agreement. A Section 37 agreement is a council report and would be brought back to a future meeting. The recommendation that we're bringing forward is that the application submitted by Neolis Inc. be approved and that bylaw 2011-090 be passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dudek and then Councillor Demoff.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Through you, Mr. Chair. The live-work units that you made reference to in your presentation, given the fact that some of the existing live-work units that we've seen thus far within, I know with Ward 2 specifically, have been problematic in terms of the amount of space that the retail commercial will provide, are these larger than what the ones we've seen previously to address those shortcomings?
I haven't done a comparison of the unit sizes. I do believe they are comparable in that they are on the small side. However, they are considered a transition space. There is the opportunity as the commercial market evolves in that area of Upper Kerr Village, and we're not expecting to see potentially a large market there right now. It does allow for the commercial units, some of the commercial units, to be used as residential space until that need is there for more commercial space. At that time, it might be better addressed by the applicant how they see that space being used, but at that time there can be some transitioning of that space into commercial units.
Okay, the only concern I have is I know the Kerr Village is very concerned about losing retail commercial space, and so with any development, is there some sort of safety mechanism whereby us saying retail commercial and transitioning, that's great, but what if the applicant says we're just sticking with residential period, and we lose the opportunity for the retail commercial? How do we enforce that is basically what I'm trying to ask.
We did put a minimum on the amount of space that can be converted. And I'm just looking for that minimum right now. And then we did include a minimum for the amount for the actual commercial space unit. So there is a minimum. They can't solely go live work. Yeah. Or sorry, they can't solely go residential ground floor.
Thank you. The other concern I have, at the information meeting that we attended, the retailers across the road were quite concerned, and I think you touched on that in your presentation, given the fact they were concerned that some of the people not having adequate provisions for parking, visitor parking, or even for the retail commercial
Right.
on the property might be using the property across the way. You identified it, but I didn't hear anything about how it's going to be addressed to address their concerns.
The surface lot is commercial and visitors. There is ample room for both. How we are going to address it bylaw-wise or signage-wise, I didn't get to that in my review.
Okay, thank you. The other concern, you talk about transportation, but for the residents in that immediate area, and you would know better than most, in terms of the West River community, the Queen Mary Drive, all the references seem to be directed towards Kerr Street, but I didn't hear anything in terms of, other than maybe through the bonusing, securing, what shall I say, roadworks, changes that way. My concern is that the traffic, as is the residents, would come from that development, and instead of turning left out towards Kerr Street, would just turn south and go through the residential community, which we've already experienced increased traffic. Is there anything that's being done to address that, or is there any amount of securities that we can require to address that from the onset?
So I guess one thing, as you know, with all the work we did with the transportation analysis for Kerr, we did look at the amount of infiltration down Queen Mary. It was deemed that, there would be a small percentage that might be doing that, but the people that would be living up here are going to be accessing the highway or going to be accessing the GO station. So the majority of the trips are going to be headed over to Dorval to the majority of the turning movements were Kerr to Dorval, Kerr Spears to Dorval, or Kerr Cornwall to the GO station. So the forecasting was predominant in the majority of the trips headed that way and not down Queen Mary. I'm not sure how to answer how we would safeguard against people going down Queen Mary, other than, we're forecasting that there won't be very many that will, but maybe that is more of a site plan condition that can be brought up and dealt with then.
I'm hopeful that will be addressed because not only the West River community, there is a child care center in close proximity to this property, and already they've been working with our traffic department in regards to dealing with the speed of vehicles coming around that bend and the sight lines associated with it, so that is encouraging. Do we have something on record through either our existing studies or something that maybe the applicant has submitted, indicating what the baseline traffic is now in the area so that we can use that as a reference point? Should, as you're saying, forecasting, what if the forecasting doesn't turn out the way we had hoped?
Right.
And as a result, we have increased traffic infiltrating into the residential area. Do we have something we can clearly indicate that that was part of the factor that went into that increased traffic for the residents?
So in 2009, when we did submit the latest of the transportation work for livable Oakville, we did do all the baselines as of 2008 numbers. We did do updated traffic for 2008 in order to do that study. So we do have a good baseline there, and that baseline also included looking at the amount of units that were going to go into the Upper Kerr Village, as well as all of Kerr, but Upper Kerr especially because of those turning movements. So, so we did do a substantial amount. We do have a baseline there based on 2008. Going forward, I think, Empire and the work that they did in going forward to their hearing and approvals, it was studied by the person who also did our 2009 work, that some of the traffic flows were decreasing and not increasing. So we do have the ability to sort of follow that as we go, as developments come in, and we do have that kind of commitment through Livable Oakville to monitor the traffic in the growth areas.
Thank you. And one last question. It pertains to the bonusing, Section 37. That will be coming back to council at a future date. And I guess I want some sort of an assurance for the residents in the area that that is something that is at our discretion. It's not something that's appealable, in other words, for the Ontario Municipal Board. In other words, if they come forward with something and we say, thanks, but we're not in agreement with what you're proposing, can we decline to enter into that agreement?
I'll through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Dudek. That decision on the Section 37 agreement is a council decision. So if the terms and conditions are not satisfactory to council, if they don't conform with the policies of the plan, hopefully we get to a point where we have a good discussion and a good agreement to present, but it does take considerable discussion. If I can just, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Dudek, just clarify on one of the questions that you raised on the parking. The bylaw does set out the minimum number of spaces as well as the location based on a mixed-use ratio. So it is established as a minimum in the bylaw how many spaces and where they are to be located, and that would be enforced by bylaw enforcement once the property is constructed.
Thank you for the clarification, and thank you.
Councillor Demoff?
You answered some of them. You gave us the traffic study, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, but based on what was in the traffic study, there are no upgrades planned to any of the intersections or any of the roads based on what is going to happen. Is that correct?
Correct. Based on, sorry, there are none coming from the developer that are coming forward. The improvements that were recognized that as necessary were already committed through the town's capital plan.
And those are happening in 2017?
The capital plan's updated annually. Right now, they're scheduled for 2017.
And in the study, it says that there are generally acceptable overall delays. And then when I looked just quickly through it, they said that there are certain parts that are over what is acceptable, and I don't quite know what an acceptable delay is.
So usually when it says generally acceptable, they mean an overall intersection delay, so it's all turning movements at a time. If there are some individual delays that are unacceptable, it will kind of specify those as individual delays. So at an intersection of Kerr and Spears, the southbound left turn is experiencing unacceptable delays. That's one individual movement of the overall intersection. Overall, the delays may average out so that the intersection as a whole is operating acceptably. For some acceptable movements at intersections overall, you look to level of service B, which is somewhere between 10 and 20 seconds of delay. A level service D is up to a minute of delay, and both of those are considered acceptable urban conditions.
So a minute delay to turn left is there now, right? Is
On
that
some of the individual movements, I believe there are, and the planned southbound turn lanes are to address some of that.
You said that there is a requirement for retail on the ground floor, because I noticed the traffic study, they had them look at 3 options, and one of the options was for all residential on the ground floor. So you are requiring the retail. You said something about moving the development south. Can you just repeat what that was
There
again?
was, when we started looking at the Shepherd Road, so Shepherd Road will be dropped approximately 3 meters by the time it hits Kerr Street, because Kerr Street's coming down that far. So in looking at how far back the grading needed to happen, we realized that it was impacting the property in question. So calling in the consultants again, it was, I think it was 0.3 of a meter or a little bit more off of the corner of their site plan. So they had to move that back that much more to allow for that grading to happen. And we looked at a compromise of the road moving slightly and the building moving slightly.
And my last question is, what is the timing anticipated for this to be started and completed? So I'm trying to get a sense of what the timing is between the 2017, if that's worst case scenario for doing the road work, and when this would be
Okay,
anticipated.
I'll let the applicant answer that. I do know that they expect a 2-year, I think, construction period. And they are hoping, if the sales center is up now, I'm not sure, but I do know that they are proposing to get that in soon. She can answer that better than me.
Thank you.
Councillor Adams. Oh, Councillor Demont for you. Councillor Adams is next.
Thank you. You may have already answered this, but maybe you could try it one more time. I was just looking at the residential component on the ground floor and the mixed-use element there. Can you explain again how we police the amount of residential that's allowed into that component of the building?
On the ground floor facing Shepherd?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the same question that Councillor Dudek asked, which was, how do we stop them from making it all residential?
Well, we do have a requirement in Livable Oakville that speaks to requiring retail commercial space within the mixed-use designations. So we have a requirement, therefore, to have it on the ground floor. We're trying to deal with the fact that there's not much of a market for the retail commercial down in that area at the moment, and understanding that hopefully that transition as envisioned is going to take place. In the bylaw, we have required that a minimum amount of space be retail, and we're allowing for those live-work units to be transitional.
So I'm looking at the bylaw on a related note. For example, on page 94, it talks about the parking ratio for mixed use, and it talks about the dwelling unit requirement, but it doesn't designate the commercial element. Do we have a standard commercial rate that we require of them, and will they meet it either way, whether it's retail or residential?
We don't have a standard commercial rate at this time. We did specify the size of the units and a minimum of 300 square meters of commercial and/or office uses required at grade. So they have planned for 733 square meters, and we have allowed them to do some transitional space, but required a minimum to stay as commercial.
Sorry, they've planned for 700. We require 300, which I see on page 96. And can you repeat the rest of your comment? So
We've allowed them to use, we've allowed them to use some of the space as transitional live-work units, so they can use some of the residential, some of the ground floor retail commercial space as residential if the market is not there. When the market does evolve in that area, which we anticipate it will, they can transition that space.
But once it's been built as a residential, won't it be almost impossible to convert it?
Well, it's being built as live-work.
Meaning what?
It will have the two entrances as, the separation from the ground floor to the upper floors.
So you'd wall off the bottom piece, or you take out the stairs, basically? Is that?
I'll have to let the applicant answer
Basically.
how they're planning on
Okay, so in
designing
any
it.
case, the base amount of 300 will always be there even at the beginning.
Yes,
So the ground level is 300, and then after that, anything beyond that, going up to 700, for example, meets the bylaw either way. They can go to 1,000 if they want, and they still meet the bylaw, basically, right?
yes.
So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there members of the public with information for council on this item? And would the applicants like to entertain some questions from the ward councillors? You're right, we would see you again.
Good evening. Lori McPherson from Bousfields, Inc. We're the planning consultants, and I have with me Stephen Teeple from Teeple Architects, who is the architect of the project. We're happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, let's see if Councillor Dudek still has one for you.
Can you address this issue of the live-work component and how you're proposing that to work in terms of what, the three of us have just raised in regards to making sure there is a commercial or retail component there and not all residential, or not leaving it residential even when the market demonstrates?
Well, I have to say that we haven't sorted out all of the details yet because we're not at the site plan stage. We haven't actually done detailed drawings of them. But because it will be condominium, often the developer can continue to own some of the units, so the live-work units, to ensure that that transition takes place. And that's likely how it'll happen in this case. So therefore, they wouldn't all get sold, or if they did get sold, there would have to be something on title which requires a certain amount to be non-residential. But, until we go to market and go to sales and get these specific site plans of how they're going to work, we don't have that information right now, but there are a number of ways that we can implement the intent of it. We'll work with staff to sort it out. I don't know if you want to see something.
And from an architectural point of view, we've transferred out the shear walls, which are normally the divisions between units, concrete walls, into columns, so that that ground floor is flexible, open space, so that you can gather those units into single larger commercial spaces. We've also given it the ceiling height required for commercial space, so it's different from the rest of the residential units, and provided the services and the front glazing required for commercial use, all incorporated into the design already.
Good to know, thank you.
Thank you very much for, Councillor Demoff.
Just in terms of timing, if you could answer that for us.
It depends on sales, of course. We have to go through site plan approval, and we have to lift the hold, so that will take a period of time to get that application and do the record of site condition, et cetera. But from beginning to end, it's usually a 3-year process, and our clients are very keen to get going on this project. So they're very positive that sales will be good, and so they would like to get in as soon as possible. And I just wanted to mention as well that in the, so we did submit a traffic impact study. It was peer-reviewed by the town's peer reviewer who did the overall Kerr Village work. They asked for further details on a whole bunch of intersections, and that a very large document was submitted with all of that information. And even though certain things won't be done until a number of years from now, there are other tweakings in the current system that can be done to accommodate the additional until that work is done. For example, the lights and the rail crossing arm are connected, and there can be different types of delays in timing built into those that can accommodate any extra turning movements and that type of thing. So they're also set out in the traffic report.
Councillor Adams.
Is the whole bottom floor commercial initially, or is there some element of it that's residential initially?
There is an element that is residential, the far east, where the townhouses go along the eastern edge. That corner unit would be residential, as well as there's a guest suite built in. So the very far edge would be more of a residential character, which would then blend, because the site next to it is designated for townhouse without any retail. So it's sort of a nice edge to have the residential lower density to transition to that medium density.
But is the main podium all retail commercial?
Well, it's all designed that it can be, as Mr. Teeple was explaining.
But initially it's not? There's a piece of the podium that isn't?
Well, there's a piece of it that is intended to be residential, the far corner, but the rest of it is designed to accommodate those transitional walls and retail space.
Our diagram is not quite good enough to be able to identify
floor plan?
what's what. Is there a way of being able to understand that better? I don't think, nothing turns on it, I'm just.
No,
trying to understand
I can put up our, I'm not sure if it's any clearer, but Ms. Collingwood's going to pull up the site plan.
No, sorry, I thought I had the photo, and I don't.
I have, yeah, it's not. Do you want to explain it from the elevation? I was just going to explain it from the site plan, if I put one here, if the folks could.
The overhead camera is what you need. Let's see if the,
In general, the site is quite deep, so the residential units are set back and face eastward. So the commercial is placed along Shepherd or the live work, and that's the general principle. But there's a large, deeper portion of the site where obviously you couldn't have commercial, right?
Oh, no, of course,
so
I'm
here
sorry,
we-
of course I meant
Yeah.
the street-facing piece
Right.
of
Yeah.
the lower floor.
So-
Exactly.
So here is Shepherd, and this is towards Kerr over here, excuse me. So the site is sort of divided in two by a driveway. So these units closer to Kerr are the live work as well as the corner unit. There's a guest suite, then this unit is part of the townhouse type units that line to the east. So what I was saying is that
Thank
a
you very
corner of
much.
it is
I understand
residential.
now.
A picture helps.
Yeah.
the councillor thanks you, council thanks you,
Thank you.
and the chair turns to Ward 2. Councillor Duddick. Councillor Duddick moves the
Motion to
staff recommendation. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Council, you have your subdivision process report, and Charles McConnell is ready to give you a presentation on it. Let me ask you if you have any questions about it. Councillor Elgar.
I don't need a presentation, I just have a couple of questions.
Right. Would council like to go straight to questions? Council would like to go to questions, I believe. Councillor Adams?
Oh,
I'd like to hear a presentation, but if there's questions first, that's fine too.
I'm so glad everyone read their report. Councillor Elgar, you may lead off.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's just regarding the planting of trees in North Oakville. That report will not be before us until November, and I just want to know how that's going to dovetail into the subdivision process report going forward, is the first question.
Right. All right. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the report that's before you tonight is it's a fairly high-level implementation strategy report that explains the background and how we interacted with council to identify what a lot of issues and concerns were with the subdivision process and how better to refine that process. So it outlines a series of steps as we go forward. And so we certainly acknowledge that that report is forthcoming, and that can very easily be dovetailed into some of the more detailed implementation components that will be forthcoming in the future.
So if, say, that report and it comes forward and it's what I think it's going to be, it just rolls straight in so that anybody going forward or anybody has already had a subdivision approved would have to abide by the new rules and regulations for plantings?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if there is a parcel of land that had already been draft approved and there were specific conditions associated with that, then those conditions would continue to apply. As I go forward in dealing with new applications, say in North Oakville, then those applications would have to respect the new standards that are forthcoming out of that report.
I was told that even though if that had been approved recently, a few, that they would probably abide by the new tree planting guidelines, because maybe it would have been worthwhile to hold up a few hundred houses until we get to those guidelines. So going forward, from this date forward, what can we do to make sure that that happens with the new guidelines?
Ms. Close, you may want to respond to that.
We had been spending quite some time doing implementation guidelines on a whole variety of subjects, and most of those were in, particularly before the North Oakville proceeded. Davis Bernardi is the first plan of subdivision that's in. Within that, we built conditions that would reflect some future requirements that we were looking for. So we've been moving those conditions through those requirements as their plan has been developing. As soon as, so previous to that, it wouldn't have anticipated any of these ones. As we go forward then, our expectation is that in November, when the North Oakville Urban Forest Management Plan comes forward, it will then, council will then have an opportunity to deal with your requirements for the urban forest, and will then reflect that in any subsequent plans that come through draft approval. So the next series of plans to come through would be the Mattamy application that you just heard a presentation to at the last meeting.
Okay, but the developers were forewarned that this was coming, and we'd probably want them to do the new way of doing it anyhow, correct?
There has been a whole series of discussions with them, informing them of the standards that we're proposing to bring forward.
Thank you. That's my first question. Second question is, the town of Oakville, we've done a yeoman job on light issues in the last few years, and I just wonder where that's going to roll in as far as like dark skies going forward, with more reports that are coming forward for North Oakville to ensure that we become dark sky compliant, probably plus other things that we're doing above and beyond that.
So similarly, through you, Mr. Chairman, as new standards evolve, if they pertain to lighting or anything else for that matter, if they're related to the subdivision process, those too could be embedded into the future processes that we would adopt and bring forward if necessary for endorsement from this council. So we are looking at best practices, as we do go forward.
When is the next package coming to us regarding lighting? Anybody got a ballpark on that we can get rolled into this? Because I like what is here, and I just want to make sure we don't miss anything.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Elgar, there is a study that has been completed by Environmental Policy, and there is a report that will be proceeding to CSC fairly shortly that talks about the new street lighting standard for the town, and that addresses the dark sky matters. And that will then, as Mr. McConnell said, be rolled into the new subdivision requirements as a new town standard, if approved by council.
Okay, I really appreciate that and what the staff are doing. There's one issue that bothers me, and we haven't been able to do anything about it, and I don't know what we do, but I really hope in the next little while we can. And it has to do with, you've got on page 64, how to require high-density development to be constructed prior to lower-density development. And I've read your answers, and there's no change. Maybe we should have reworded it. How do we make sure that people buying realize where the high density is going to go? To make them aware of it. I know we're supposed to have it in sales trailers, but it doesn't seem to be working. Can anybody help me in that area from the planning staff? How do we hammer that home to all prospective purchasers?
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll attempt to answer that. And you'll see in the presentation, one of the things that we heard loud and clear through the workshop that we had with council was communications, and how can we communicate more effectively with future and prospective homeowners, with developers for that matter, communicate what our requirements are. So we've taken a lot of stock in that, in how we can further enhance that entire communication strategy. So there is just that, a communication strategy going forward. So that is certainly, and it is a matter of education. How do we better convey that information that certain areas are higher density and greater height, and so that there is a better acknowledgement on their part in buying into that community as to where those types of development opportunities are.
Well, hopefully we do a little more work on that going forward. I thank you. Thanks very much.
Right.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Anyone else have any questions? Councillor Elgar, I wonder if you would give us a motion.
Sure. I'll move the
Councillor Elgar, Councillor Dudek?
I understood that our staff had a presentation, and I thought because we had spent a lot of time on this issue, that it would be useful to hear it, and that members of the public who might be watching might also benefit from understanding what we're thinking of doing and working on, particularly with respect to new subdivision issues and dealing with the separation of when we assume and when we take on the work of the landscaping and so forth.
If you remember, presentation's a miniature version of the report that we published. I hope that after the presentation, those things have been answered. Mr. McConnell, would you give council your presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, of course. So you may recall that back in March of 2010, town staff did engage council in a workshop to look specifically at the subdivision process and what the issues were, and what were some of the concerns that you were hearing on the street from ratepayers, and issues and concerns that you were experiencing firsthand, specifically from things that you've witnessed on the ground and related to the process itself. So we engaged yourselves to better understand that and how we can address some of those concerns vis-a-vis the overall subdivision process. So that's exactly what we have done. And I will add firstly that with the assistance of our development engineering department, and specifically Heinz Hecht and Darnell Lambert, and our commission staff and our legal staff, we've been working quite diligently over the past year plus to arrive at this point in time. So just as a quick summary of what the presentation will entail, just a bit of background around that council workshop, what the subdivision process fundamentally is, an understanding between more what we call the decision-making aspects of it versus the more detailed implementation components of it, what we've actually embedded in the report that's before you today and how it addresses a lot of those issues. I'll look at the enhanced subdivision process. Also internally in the planning department, we've been undergoing some process mapping changes and structural changes within our department to be more responsive to the needs of the subdivision process, and then an outline of the next steps as we do go forward. So again, just to quickly reiterate, back in March of 2010, we engaged yourselves to look at the existing subdivision process, and that in part was driven by North Oakville coming on stream and all the implementation components that staff had been working on. But how do we, be more responsive and sensitive to the concerns and issues we've been hearing specifically around the overall subdivision process? So that was our opportunity to make changes to the current process in response to the issues that we've been hearing. So the two-stage process that I was alluding to, there's two components to each. Firstly, is the pre-consultation and the submission requirements, what town staff requires of developers to submit, and the different types of studies that they are required to submit as well. Taking it through the consultative process, with the general public, hearing what those issues, going out into the community, and arriving at a state of draft plan approval that has been adopted by town council. That takes us into the implementation stage, dealing with the registration of the subdivision, putting together a subdivision agreement, and actually constructing the subdivision, the roads and the infrastructure, and laying out the grading and drainage components of the lots. Having them occupied, and going right through to the assumption process. So those are the two stages and the four fundamental processes. That hasn't changed, but it's where the trigger points and the decision-making points fall within those two key stages of the process. So the purpose of the report that is before you this evening, firstly, just summarizes the issues that we've heard in Appendix B, a detailed table that identifies the issue, and there's a bit of a discussion around those issues and how we go forward, how we can actually give effect to those various issues. You'll recall that it was a very constructive workshop where there were stickies that were posted on those four components of the subdivision process, and firstly what the issue is and where it should fall within the overall process. So we use that as the basis for constructing the table that more clearly articulates what an issue is and how we can address it and go forward. Likewise, look at the four stages of the subdivision process, where we're putting a greater emphasis on the decision-making process in the first half of that process. As we've already mentioned, the communication strategy is fundamental and paramount in how do we, communicate with our stakeholders and the future residents and the purchasers of lots as we go forward. So it's that access to that information, and how do we do that in the most seamless way. Again, identify further process-related changes that we've been undergoing within the department, and to seek council endorsement of the report that's before us tonight. So around the communication strategy, what staff have instituted so far is clearly defined submission requirements. So when an applicant comes in, they know right up front specifically what they have to submit to start the ball rolling from a subdivision application perspective. Greater public engagement is crucial, as I've mentioned, so that homeowners really know what to expect when they buy into a community. And you'll recall through the North Oakville subdivisions that we have brought forward, we did put together a communications booklet. So this was very successful. They were provided within the sales trailers of the development, and they were scooped up very quickly. So this is certainly a very valuable tool to go forward to further enhance this document based on a lot of the pieces, again, that you find in your Appendix B. So we'll continue to use that as a communications tool. There's new conditions of draft plan approval that will be more streamlined and more responsive to a lot of the issues that we have heard. The grading certification process that I think Mr. Lambert will speak to in a moment is another way of adding greater certainty as to what a landowner can do to their property from a grading perspective, and what the expectation is on them through the assumption process. And then just an ongoing monitoring. Staff will continue to look for ways to further make improvements to the overall process. So just a couple of quick visuals to indicate the types of things that we will want to communicate to the prospective home purchaser, and where. So certainly in North Oakville particularly, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for on-street parking. So we certainly need to bring that to people's attention, that there is going to be on-street parking, because that might not, and it might be overnight and might be based on a permitting system, but it's something different than they might be accustomed to now. So again, it's important to communicate that out to prospective purchasers. Given the more finer grid of the street pattern and a tighter lotting pattern, where more homes are brought forward and closer to the street, as indicated in this photograph, it's easy to lose sight of where your actual property line falls. And people may be inclined to start changing the grades and putting structures such as fences and steps into the road allowance itself. So again, we need to more clearly define where that property line is and identify what can and cannot be done within the road allowance. Composite utility plans need to communicate precisely and earlier in the process where infrastructure is going to occur. This is a more urbane type of setting, but it's just indicative of fire hydrants and street poles and trees and benches, but also utility boxes and the utility equipment that you'll find in a residential setting. So those are the types of elements that a landowner will want to know. Where is it in relation to my driveway and in relation to my home? Encroachments into again, the road allowance. A situation where people don't realize where their property line is. They think, oh, well, you know, the sidewalk is mine and the road's another 5 or 6 feet away, so it's okay to, you know, do things within that area, when in fact the road allowance falls maybe halfway through their front lawn. So it's, again, communicating where that property line falls. Likewise, works that can be done within side yards, within unassumed subdivisions. Again, there might not be a realization that, you know, it might be a bit premature to start, you know, significantly changing the grades of properties prior to assumption. And I'll just turn to Mr. Lambert to speak to a few issues specifically about the lot grading process.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I did add to this slide deck because certainly the issue of lot grading and homeowner creativity comes up from time to time and inevitably in every subdivision. So just looking at your lot grading process today, because I know that usually comes up a fair bit when it's time for assumption or somebody's moved in and the years have gone on and things have changed. So just going to walk you through, right now, lot grading plans come in, they're submitted to our department, and they're approved prior to any building permit issuance. So there's a clear plan of how this lot, along with all the other lots, are to work and drain. That's a process of about 1 to 3 months, and then, you know, they get their building certificate, the foundation goes in, rough grading takes place, and there's a rough grading certification that takes place. That's really for the benefit of the developer that says everything's on course, things are working well. Then there's about another 2 to 12 months while the rest of the house takes shape, and then there's finally topsoil and sod laid, and then there's a final certification by the developer. That usually gives the green light to a homeowner to start to do the things that they typically do. Put up fences, do a little bit of landscaping. A number of things can happen over the 4 to 5 years that take place between then and assumption. And at assumption, that's when we ask the developer, can you go back out and certify the lots? And lo and behold, the world has changed. There's got to be a better way to do this. Grading issues start to appear in that period of time, roughly when the homeowner takes in and they're done things inside their house and they start to venture out into the yard. So if I just took a snapshot of a subdivision and I took it from our good GIS system that said, you know, year 1, there's a concept plan for an area drawn up. There's going to be some lots here and there's going to be some roads. Year 2 goes in, some houses pop up. You'll see that the sodding's put in. A little bit of creativity has already showed up in the backyard of some of the homes. Year 3 comes along, fencing starts to go up. A little bit more issue starts to take place in the backyard. Year 4 comes along, even more things happen, other parts of the subdivision unfold. Year 5 comes up for assumption, and these are true snapshots in time. You see that there's a lot of creativity that takes place in the backyard. Pools go in, gardens go in, sheds go up against fence lines, phones start to ring, things have happened, the grading isn't the way that it was when I initially came to be here. There's a picture of what initial certification looks like. Lots are graded, there's well-defined swales, there's no fences, there's virtually nothing in the way, and the drainage paths work quite well. Homeowner additions take place, with or without permits. We get the desire to walk between my neighbor's house and get to my backyard and enhance my driveway, and we wonder why drainage goes the way that it does. So is there a better way? And this is where we're looking to make the changes. Lot grading process of the future. Same diagram that I had up to you before. One option we're looking at is certainly when the rough grade, when the foundation of the home goes in. Right now, the developer is required to certify only particular lots where there's a town easement for a rear yard catch basin to make sure everything is fine and going along right. We're looking at doing that for all the lots. Because there are changes, homeowners want different elevations on different floors, they want to walk out here. And it doesn't take much when you look at a side yard grading that may have 2% and a side door goes in and a step goes out, the plan goes right out the window. The other change is to really back up from that 4 to 5 year period. So 12 months, topsoil and sod goes down, builder sends the owner a letter saying your lot is now certified. If you have any issues with the way I, the builder, the developer, have built your lot, please bring it to our attention within the next 60 days. Otherwise, at this point, you may proceed with doing the things that you want to do, fencing, landscaping, and so on and so forth. We would like to include with that a piece of town information, a flyer, on lot grading, the do's and the don'ts, and this is really what you want to do and this is how you should do it. It is very key, in my opinion, that we get that out in time before homeowners do the things that they do. We know what they are going to do. So again, much like this communication, which are our first step out the door, you're buying into a neighborhood, this is the way it's going to look like and operate. It's timely that we get some information out to the owners saying, it's probably that time where you are going to do these things. Here's some advice, here are the rules, here are the regulations, so that in all hopes we kind of minimize. I can't say we're going to eliminate, that's impossible. Homeowners are well advanced beyond my staff to try and keep up with them in the creative things that they do, but we can look to minimize those issues. Other potential enhancements from an engineering perspective, right now you have lots that are allowed to be graded over 3, 4, 5 yards. My water goes on to my neighbor, goes on to my other neighbor before it goes into the catch basin. In North Oakville in particular, you're going to have smaller lots, and the desire to maximize the use of that space is going to create issues. So perhaps there's a better way to engineer it so the lot is more tolerant to the types of changes that are going to take place. One item we are looking at is maybe looking at increasing the frequency of the rear yard catch basins, so that maybe 4 lots are reliant on a basin versus 6, 7, and 8, and the whole traversing across my neighbor to get relief for my property. Another option is to look at ways of increasing the absorption along the swale line. Typical coin phrase would be a French drain or something of that nature, because as much as we get calls about standing water, we also get calls about, well, the ground is just squishy. It's kind of wet. Welcome to Oakville clay. It holds water for a very long period of time. Rule of thumb, we look to have really no groundwater on the surface 48 hours after a rain event. That would be great. That doesn't mean the ground is walkable, traversable. It's still going to be a bit squishy. The only way around that, and we have made these recommendations to some homeowners and they have taken them up, is to put a French drain type system and tie it into the catch basin in the rear yard. They're happy, they get an enhanced level of grading treatment in their backyard, but it's not something that we burden on the builder at the moment to put in, but that is something that we could look at. The other, much like this, is a very poignant and to the point brochure that I think needs to be handed out to the owners saying, you know, here's the lot grading bylaw, here's the do's and don'ts, and here's the things that you could do. And if you wish to have some advice before you venture off down that path of landscaping and fenced installation, please give us a call before. We'd rather have that than after. So that concludes my presentation on that specific issue, but Charlie and here are certainly here to answer any questions that you have.
Questions? Questions once, questions twice. That was thorough.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was well done.
Councillor Adams enjoyed it. And he was very attentive. Actually, in all fairness, we get a lot of complaints from people, which we've learned to throw your way. And we did that before we then asked you to redesign the system so that we get fewer of these. So well done. Thank you very much. Who on council wants to move the staff recommendation? Councillor Elgar does. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. That brings us to what I think of as the big event of the night, number 4, the terms of reference for the multi-year zoning bylaw review. And council, your planning director, Dana Anderson, I think has an introduction to make.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is the big event of the night. And in presenting the event of the night is a new staff member among us. Joe Nethery is the manager for the zoning bylaw project. Joe has been with us for a few months, and Joe has considerable background and experience writing bylaws for a number of municipalities throughout Ontario. And so we look forward to Joe managing the project and working with town staff and council, probably one of the most important implementation projects for livable Oakville. And so I'll turn it over to Joe to walk you through the terms of reference for the project.
Joe, on behalf of council, welcome, and council is all ears. We look forward to your report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, and members of council. It's a pleasure to be here and being a part of the Oakville team. So yes, my name's Joe Nethery. I'm a registered professional planner who now works here full-time on town staff, and this is my primary responsibility here at the town, getting us to the point where we have a new zoning bylaw. Zoning is my favorite aspect of planning, and hopefully I can convince all of you about the same. So my reason for being here tonight is to describe why it is that we're undertaking this project, introduce you to the structure that the project team is taking. Also, a number of the guiding principles that are informing the preparation of the first draft of this bylaw, as well as detailing, to some extent, the program, the work program that we're going to be following to get to that point. I've also been asked to give some emphasis to the communications plan and how we're going to be engaging with yourselves and staff and the broader public over the next couple of years. So why this project? It's one of many livable Oakville implementation projects that Council has initiated over the next couple of years. In particular, it's a key action for the 2012 to 2014 period in the strategic plan. Right now, the town has 2 bylaws in effect. 1984-63, which covers all of the lands south of Dundas Street and north of the Highway 407, and bylaw 2009-189 applying to North Oakville. 1984-63 is the prime emphasis of this project. As much as we are looking at the structure of zoning in the town in its entirety, our main number 1 purpose is to implement livable Oakville and its policies and its vision for development and the creation of the most livable community in the country. In order to get that, 1984-63 needs a little work. It's currently the oldest bylaw in Halton and Peel regions. It wasn't for a time. Our neighboring municipalities have completed their reviews. However, all's not bleak. It's by far not one of the oldest bylaws in the broader GTA, and once this is done, it's going to be one of only a handful that actually comply with growth plan requirements and the complete provincial policy framework. As a little side note and a trivia note for all of you history buffs out there, 1984-63 has been amended 874 times since it was first adopted by council. That's not uncommon. It's about 40 amendments a year over the life of the bylaw. But as a result of all of your predecessors before you, all the predecessors before us, there's a number of different inconsistencies in the document. First and foremost amongst those, that it doesn't conform to livable Oakville. So we need a new set of rules to implement that vision and make sure that council's vision is expressed appropriately. And that's why we are doing this project. 2 quick revisions with respect to what's showing in your report on page 74. we have one member of the technical advisory contacts whose position was misidentified, which is entirely my fault. Cindy Toth is the Director of Environmental Policy. We also have one addition to that group. Dorothy St. George from Economic Development will be advising us as well. But basically, there's a core team of 5 of us who will be undertaking most of the authorship work. 2 planners, Ramona Boddington and Brad Sunderland, are assisting on this project alongside their long-range planning roles. Matt Rubik from Building Services will be assisting to help us figure out some implementation problems that we have today and how we can sort those out. From a graphics and mapping perspective, Jim Birch from Strategic Business Services is on the team as well. We are working through an advisory team consisting of senior management in the Planning and Development Commission, Miss Anderson, of course, Diane Childs, who's here tonight with us, the manager of long-range planning, and from the building services side, Dennis Doe and John Tudor. Dennis having as much experience with the zoning bylaw as anybody around today. We are constantly going back and forth with each other through scheduled meetings, informal meetups as well, to discuss the various issues that we've come up with, agree on where the next steps are going to go, and constantly making sure that we're all informed as to how this project proceeds. From a technical perspective, there's 3 main groups of individuals. 2 sets of technical advisory contacts, one consisting of members from within the Planning and Development Commission, and the other compiled from all the other departments in Town Hall who are heavily involved in zoning. We also are building a group of outside stakeholder contacts, including representatives from the development industry, builders and consultants alike, and interested residents who want to come out and talk with us. We have a meeting set up with them shortly as well. From a broader perspective, there's also the public in general who are interested and want to be informed on projects like this. The town's executive and senior management teams for strategic advice. And one item I'd like to point out to council tonight, we are considering setting up a special in-zone subcommittee of council. We're intending that it would function pretty similar to the Livable Oakville subcommittee in terms of its function and how we would deal with issues in that sense. Should council be interested in that approach, we would report back to you at a later time. The feedback from those groups are going to be collected by us core project members, all fed into the recommendations that go up to the advisory team. Anything that comes before council will be vetted by everybody involved in this project, so what you are seeing at the end of the day is an ultimate and final recommendation. So in terms of how we're going to get there, from a planning rationale perspective, it's very important and crucial that the approach that we take is defined and clarified to all involved. We have a 3-tier set of principles that will get us there. And first and foremost amongst those is conforming to Livable Oakville. It's the primary source for policy direction on growth and development in the town. And it does that by establishing a mission and some principles behind that, land use structure with designations and use permissions within that, and a whole range of development policies on a number of issues that council is supposed to consider when making decisions. Given that the Planning Act requires that a zoning bylaw conform to an official plan that's in effect, Livable Oakville forms a very natural first step. However, all the specifics, while it's a very detailed and focused document in terms of telling us what we can and can't do, all of the specifics aren't exactly spelled out, and in particular with the standards that would apply in a zoning bylaw. So the second tier of principles all revolve around how we come up with the standards that we'll ultimately be recommending. And first amongst those is that we want to take a design-first approach to ensure that the development that we're getting in Oakville is attractive, that it complements the public realm that we're trying to create here. We also need development to ensure that it's sensitive to the context that we're operating within, make sure somebody doesn't end up with surprise developments that they weren't exactly anticipating. The do no harm principles in Livable Oakville, they can be extended into zoning as well. by considering regulations that'll minimize the effects of physical change on the natural environment. So this project will consider a number of mechanisms to mitigate against those harmful effects. Likewise, as you can imagine, after 27 some odd years, the 1984-63 is a pretty thick document. This is a good time and opportunity for us to consolidate and trim as much of that paper as we can. But when we cut out when a lot of that paperwork gets cut out, many of those policies are duplicate. So as much as the ultimate bylaw that we approve in a couple of years is a lot thinner, we're also hoping it's going to contain a lot more in being able and in addressing the issues that face us today. Now, I'm sure many people before me have talked about legal nonconformity and legal noncompliance to council. One area where we need to be sensitive to is maintaining existing permissions that have been given. It's been a recent challenge in some of our neighboring municipalities in terms of adopting new bylaws that may have omitted a couple of permissions. We don't want to go there, and we will prepare a document that doesn't take us there. That means recognizing what's already out there and ensuring it's treated appropriately in the new bylaw, and any approvals that are in transition are also adequately addressed as well. Staff have also taken a position that we aren't going to consider any site-specific requests in amending the zoning bylaw through this process. Council already has a detailed route for considering those sorts of applications. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. If somebody, that doesn't stop somebody in the public, a developer or a citizen equally, from raising an issue with us that we can investigate and consider, so long as it's something that we're treating everybody equitably with. Over the last few years, staff have also, and council have approved a number of housekeeping amendments relating to policy changes. Where that work has already been completed, we might as well make good use of it. No sense in reinventing the wheel where it isn't needed. Those issue-specific findings are something that should be preserved going forward. And lastly, it's always a good time when we do big reviews like this to look at what our neighbors are doing and see if they're onto something that's really interesting that we should consider here as well. All the work that we'll be undertaking will contain best practices review as to make sure that our newest bylaw in Halton and Peel region is in fact the best one. If anything happens to filter through those couple of tiers, that's where we would be looking at doing additional research and looking at and having to do special research, special investigation to come up with a standard that remains. So how do we get to a new bylaw? First up, what we've been working on for the last few months are various startup tasks. We've established a team, we've written up the terms of reference that expand upon what we're summarizing here tonight. We've had a number of introductory meetings internally with staff, and we'll soon be looking to go out and talk with various stakeholders as well. Something I'd like to bring particular attention to is the preparation of some public education materials. There's a lot of people out there, and a number of planners in particular, I don't want to leave us out, for whom zoning is a relatively new or an unfamiliar issue. For Livable Oakville, staff prepared a number of brochures and pamphlets outlining how it is the process worked and what it is that we were trying to create. We'd like to do take the same approach with this project as well. Our communications plans is effectively finalized in terms of how, what form those documents should take. We would begin to prepare those documents in earnest this fall. And the culmination of all this work is tonight. The recommendation is to receive this report, and should council be happy with that, on we go to phase 2. We'll be looking at preparing about 12 technical papers on this. Each one of those papers delves into a very specific issue, or I shouldn't say a generalized group of issues in the bylaw, for instance, definitions, residential use permissions, how to deal with the mapping, site-specific exceptions. Once each of those are prepared, as we prepare each of those, we'd be looking at having special meetings with our various stakeholders, including the subcommittee of council. Altogether, those documents would contain a set of recommendations that the new zoning bylaw should contain. Once all those are pieced together, we have a first draft of a new zoning bylaw. We would anticipate having that to council in September of 2012. After a year of doing the legwork, it's off to doing the legwork in the public. Adopting a comprehensive zoning bylaw process, statutorily speaking, is very similar to if we were trying to approve a development application. It's almost exactly the same as going through the official plan adoption process. Effectively, what this project proposes is going to the public 3 times, with 2 sets of open houses and the statutory public meeting at the end of the day. The Planning Act requires 1 open house. We'd like to do 2. And in those multiple events over a set week, where the maps and the texts are out and a whole fleet of staff are out to answer everybody's questions. The statutory public meeting, of course, is when any member of the public wishes to have their say and council for council to listen to. Staff are also proposing opening up their doors for a couple of dedicated meeting days where if individuals are looking to chat with a planner to figure things out or have their say, we'll make sure our doors are open and we can set aside that time for them. The result of all that of each of those rounds would be an additional report to council summarizing the consultation undertaken and an updated draft of the bylaw. The sum total of that is 4 drafts of the bylaw, the 4th one being for approval. That target date would be September of 2013. Once all that's said and done, there's a couple of little cleanup tasks at the end of the day that'll need to be taken care of. Finalizing various user guides, getting the bylaws online, some technical legal matters that a planner usually only has to deal with once every 20 years in terms of handling the transition of the transition between documents. And hopefully, we can handle any appeals to the OMB if applicable. I'd like to be optimistic and hope that we can avoid them, but in my experience, I only know of 1 comprehensive zoning bylaw in recent years that wasn't appealed out of the 12 that I have intimate familiarity with. But if we can follow these principles all the way through and actively engage our stakeholders, what we can minimize are the number of appeals, and particularly the number of issue-based appeals. And that's where our communications plan comes into effect. I mean, primarily it's all designed to identify and adequately address as many issues up front so that there aren't any surprises at the end of the day. Internally, meeting with our various teams and groups and doing staff training and workshops help with the review of those issues and confirming the approach that staff propose to take for this project. It assures that everyone who's going to be involved in zoning makes sure that their issues are adequately addressed, and better yet, has them familiar with the bylaw before it comes fully into effect. Going out into the public, we're looking about adding value to our process and engaging the public at the right time with as much information as we can give them. Inherently, that means exceeding the minimum Planning Act standards as I just described. And we do that by effectively broadening and creating as diverse a range of engagement opportunities as we can. So as much as we're doing the open houses and the usual public meetings, we're also creating these materials for people to take away and consume at home. We're opening up our doors to provide those meeting opportunities, seeking those residents, property owners and developers who want to contribute to this process and getting their feedback while we're preparing these drafts. And of course, all of this will be online in a project website that's almost effectively ready to go. And so that concludes a short summary on my favorite parts about being a registered professional planner. I'd like to, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you very much for your confidence-inspiring report. And I'm sure that everyone at the council table has noticed the optimism and glee with which you face this job. Questions, Council? Councillor Adams?
I hope every member of our staff approaches his job with so much glee, because if so, we're in good hands. I had 2 questions for you. One is about the stakeholder groups, and you list, for example, residents associations, and I wondered if you would consult with the members of council about how best to consult in each of the various parts of town, recognizing that there are some areas that are very well represented by residents associations and other parts that there might be one residents association for the whole area with various levels of involvement.
Or even some areas with none.
And some areas with, well, that's what I was going to, some areas with none. So I wondered if that would be possible. I'm sure the answer is yes.
Yes, through your worship, absolutely. And a big component of us being able to engage with the people of Oakville is working through the various networks that everybody has established to identify where those opportunities can be.
We used advisory groups going through the Livable Oakville process, and I think that was a helpful process, and perhaps that's something that we could consider mimicking for this process. So that was one. The other is I'm looking at your list of technical papers, and there are some that I think do what I'm thinking of, and in particular there's one that says existing special provisions and minor variance review. I take it that's looking at all of the COA decisions to determine if something that's happened in one location should apply to all similar locations?
Yes, through your worship, that's correct. The situation with 1984-63 is that over the 45 some odd years of zoning in the town is that we've accumulated about 850 and counting site-specific exceptions. Not uncommon. Markham has thousands of them. Toronto has thousands upon thousands. Even little old Meaford up on Georgian Bay has about 250 of them after having done a zoning bylaw review. So what that paper is going to be focusing on is how we can try and scope down that number as best we can. The approach that was used in Halton Hills took it down from several hundred to about 40 at the end of the day. So that paper will explore the various options we can use to get down to a number, and using an approach that's satisfactory to council.
Thank you. And so will that deal with areas that are going through, I'll call it redevelopment, where like Fulgerwood and College Park, where there are homes that are being substantially rebuilt, and other areas like the Iroquois Ridge areas and probably the River Oaks area where there are sort of more minor redevelopments going on? So it'll cover some of the COA things, but there are perhaps some other ones that we're dealing with that we've got older homes built in older times, and now they're being demolished to have brand new homes built. I mean, we see this all the time in south of the QEW, but we're now seeing it north of the QEW, and the zoning is different. So are we going to be looking at that particular type of issue?
Through your worship, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Elgar.
Thanks. I agree with you. It's all about the zoning. But it truly is. But how many people do you want from council on your subcommittee?
It's a trick question. Don't answer.
I'll defer to Ms. Anderson on this one.
As many that would like to participate.
Tricky answer.
In the context of the requirements that I know our clerk's department will want to be consulted on, I think the importance of having a subcommittee of council similar to the Livable Oakville subcommittee is that those meetings will be open to the public. All of that information will be available online and accessible. So it does give that additional consultation opportunity. It also gives the opportunity to bring forward technical matters for discussion prior to them being finalized with the draft. So I would suspect if there is an interested group similar to Livable Oakville, that would be a manageable size of a group.
So now, I'm having trouble understanding just how you think you're going to do this. You're trying to amalgamate the 84 and the 98 two zoning bylaws into one new bylaw, 2013? That's the plan?
Through you, your worship, it's a bit of a nuanced answer that I have to provide here. With our primary intent, I guess the answer is it's a yes and a no, in that what we are looking at the zoning framework as it applies entirely with the town, But the no is that there's currently 2 separate policy planning frameworks in effect. The main intent of this project is to implement livable Oakville, which applies to most of the established urban areas and north of the 407. Where 2009-189, the North Oakville zoning bylaw, can assist and guide in this process is that the town went through this sort of a review a couple of years ago in developing those standards, those definitions and that framework. A lot of that information can inform us on this project, especially in trying to create as many similarities as we can. In terms of a final product, right now, our priority is replacing 1984-63.
Okay, that helps me, because I was trying to figure out when you start talking, I thought, well, how does the natural heritage system get modified? And you're saying it won't be, because it's part of the North Oakville, the 2009 plan. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Other questions? All right, Council, I believe that I can detect the necessary signs that you all would enthusiastically support a subcommittee of council in the manner that we did Livable Oakville. And so I would look for someone who might like to move recommendation 4 with the additional words, and that staff develop a plan for an in-zone subcommittee of council. And that's moved by Councillor Duddick. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is adopted. Now, Council, we have a delegation who wants to speak on item number 5, and we have a confidential litigation matter. I would like to know if you are satisfied with your report and would like to move, without going into camera, the recommendation in the September 29th report from the legal department. Councillor Duddick is happy with that. Is there anyone who objects to going that way? Councillor Duddick moves it. All in favor? Opposed? It carries. Now, can I make public what that is? All right, Council has just unanimously adopted this recommendation, that legal staff be instructed to present to the Ontario Municipal Board the modifications to the Livable Oakville plan detailed in the confidential report dated September 29th, 2011. Thank you very much, Council. So now, that brings us to the advisory committee minutes, and they appear to be more momentous than usual. And we have a request to be a delegate from Andy Bruce, and he's patiently waited. So, Mr. Bruce, Council is ready for you.
Hey, Mr. Mayor and Council. There's 3 people that are basically interested in what we're talking about is the Bronte study of the Bronte Village Heritage Resource Review thing. I don't know if you've all got this and read it all by now, but it is Bronte. Bronte, as you know, has been left behind for all intents and purposes in the heritage matter, and I've been quite pushing for it, and we finally have a study which tells us where we should go and where we shouldn't. But there are 3 people, 3 ones. There's the Bronte Historical Society. Now Barbara McAlpine, unfortunately, would try to get her tonight, but she had other things. The BVRA, Lynn McGinn, is also unavailable tonight. And even though I'm an individual one, I am a member of both the BVRA and the Bronte Historical Society. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit for everybody tonight of the parties that are interested in this, if that's okay. But the BVRA is an interesting one because over the years they've evolved in what their criteria is and what they're all about. And basically what they're doing in the new a couple months ago, mission statement, they have it as protecting Bronte's character, charm, and waterfront, number 1. Number 2, fostering and promoting community spirit, and 3, respecting the heritage of Bronte. Now, that is what they're supporting, so you can see that they are now becoming aware that Bronte is deficient in study of the Bronte area. And myself and the Bronte Historical Society, I'm sure a lot of you had Barbara here at different times and know how much we've done in that. A lot more of the work in the Bronte one is, as committees are assembling stuff, information and, it's not my field of information and cataloging it and all that. So, if you ever need information on Bronte, go to the Bronte Historical Society. But personally, I've been fighting for this for quite a while in our area, and I recently have had, unfortunately, Ms. Anderson before that, and I've had both of the heritage planners come around and walk the area with me, and this is what resulted in the study you've seen today. And I'm just here now, and I'm sure we'll be here, I hope, at the next meeting when this is going to be passed, that a little more on it. But I don't want to go on yet. I know I've been here waiting for all this, but I don't think there's anything except please pass this and get it so that we can move quickly, as fast as we can to get the study done. There is, just like you heard about the thing is, there's a lot of the area, there's one specific area where I live in, which is south of Lakeshore, between the river and West Street and the Lakeshore and Lakeshore. And every time we turn around, there's somebody coming in. If they have the bylaw, if they can meet the bylaw, they can demolish a house and build the biggest house they can put on there under the bylaws. And that is going on. And it's unfortunate because we've had a lot of development that are and it's usually the people have lived there a while before they decide to build or something, and they are building sympathetic to scale. They're still getting the same square footage, they just aren't building ugly buildings, put it bluntly. And that's a little bit of what we'd like to try and get some control on that. And also the area north of Bronte, the downtown area, right up to, I think it's Rebecca, East Street to the lake, to the creek, basically, a study there. And if anybody still drives through there, you'll realize how many small bungalows are still there. And also realize, again, how many newer houses are going up. But then you'll look at it, and I talked to a designer the other day about it because I was really impressed with it, of asking him why he can design such good houses that are sensitive to the scale of the area, and appreciate that it's the area that can develop the things. We don't need sidewalks on all the streets. We don't need, that's one of the character of the old town. And so those are what it is. And I'm just asking now, on behalf of all of us, let's pass it, be around the next council, and as fast as possible, let's get it going, because it's a struggle, and we can't stop them. There's no bylaws or any ways to stop the infill development, or whatever you want to call it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Are any questions for Mr. Bruce? Thank you very much, sir. Councillor Johnson?
I just wanted to thank Andy for coming out tonight, and hope we see you back on the 24th.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, I wonder if you could give us a motion to receive the minutes of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee meeting of September 27th. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The minutes are received. We now need a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Knoll, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. That carries. I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on discussion items 1, 2, 3, and 4, and confidential discussion items C1 and C1A. Confidential item C2 was withdrawn before the meeting after the printing of the agenda. And the advisory committee minutes, item 5, as noted by the clerk. All in favor? Oh, I need a mover and seconder of the report. Councillor Elgar, Councillor Grant, all in favor. The report is adopted. Thank you for that. Now, does anyone have any emergency congratulatory condolence business for council? I have a small item. I just want to congratulate Councillor Elgar on his birthday. By my math, when you came to this place in, I believe, the late part of the year 2000,
Yeah.
that might have been 11 years ago or so, or maybe even a touch more. And And in that time, you have been, at least to me, and I think to the rest of us as well, although I recognize I can only speak for myself, but you've been an inspiration in terms of your dedication to preserving and protecting the environment above all. I mean, it's not for nothing that you founded Oakville Green, but then you decided to put action where talk was and suffer the slings and arrows of political fortune. So I just want to congratulate you on this milestone birthday for having survived and wish you many, many more. Thank you. Anyone else, or did I fill that need? Well, all right then, Council. Mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws. Councillor Johnston, Councillor Duddick, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That ends our agenda. Thank you for your time and attention. That includes the bylaw 2011-106 as revised. And we are adjourned.
Darn it.